He didn't drive to the old cannery district to make peace with her. He went because Casamafero held the keys to every clean dollar the family owned, and Lazaro Corvi had learned young that money you can't see is money already gone. His steadiest lieutenant had missed 3 deadlines in a row, and in 6 years she had never missed one. He expected an empty apartment and a wire transfer routed to a name he didn't recognize. Instead, when the swollen door gave under his shoulder, he found her folded on the bathroom floor in the dark, both arms wrapped around her middle as if she were holding something together by will alone. What he finally understood in that one frozen second didn't just end his engagement 2 nights before the wedding, it rewrote the rest of his life. The velvet tray held 11 diamonds, and Lazaro Corvi could not have named a single reason to care about any of them. He stood at the center of the private viewing room on the top floor of the Meridian Tower, where the walls were quilted in oyster gray silk, and the only window was a narrow slot of bulletproof glass. Beyond it, the harbor had dissolved into fog, the cranes and the black water and the sodium lamps all bleeding into one gray nothing. The room smelled of cold metal, cut lilies, and the faint ozone of the security scanners 2 floors down. It had been engineered to feel like safety. To Lazaro, it felt like the inside of a coffin built for a man with taste. The oval, Isolde said, without looking up from her phone. Not the cushion cut. The cushion cut looks like something a footballer buys his mistress. She was arranged on the low settee behind him. One long leg crossed over the other, a flute of champagne, sweating untouched on the arm. Isolde Deverell was beautiful the way a winter coastline is beautiful. Pale, exact, and entirely without mercy. Her family ran the freight rail and the private banks in 3 cities up the coast. His family ran the ports. In 2 nights, beneath a chandelier, in front of 300 guests who all quietly wanted one another dead, the 2 of them would be married, and the rail and the ports would fold into a single house. It would be the most profitable lie anyone in that room ever told. Whatever you prefer, Lazaro said. You're not even looking. I'm looking at all of it. It's the same stone 11 times. He turned his left wrist and wound his father's watch, a scratched, unremarkable thing worth less than the cufflinks holding his shirt closed, its second hand sweeping in the same patient circle that had put him to sleep as a boy and steadied his hand as a grown man. He wound it twice a day, at noon and at midnight. Whether it needed winding or not, it was the one ritual he trusted, without question. A thing you keep running keeps running. That was the whole of his philosophy, stretched thin across 2 decades of very careful violence. He had spent 20 years turning his family's brutality into something you could seat at a hospital fundraiser. The suits, the boards, the scholarships with his dead mother's name on them, all of it a clean skin grown over a body that still, underneath, did exactly what bodies like his had always done. He was good at it. He was the best anyone in the city had ever seen. And standing there, while a jeweler murmured about carrots, he felt the old cold boredom that had lately started to frighten him, because it was the boredom of a man who has arranged everything and can no longer remember why. There should have been a 4th person in the room. Ordinarily, she would have been standing just inside the door with a slim leather folio under one arm, saying nothing, missing nothing. Casamafero did not choose jewelry and did not care about galas, but she signed for them. Every clean dollar that had ever moved through the Corvi name moved because she moved it, through the laundromats and the produce importers and the 2 restaurants and the marina, threaded so finely through so many honest little businesses that no auditor alive had ever pulled the string all the way out. She held the codes, she held the accounts. No one else knew the shape of. If Lazaro was the clean skin, Cosima was the nervous system underneath it, and he had spent 6 years pretending a man could take his own nervous system for granted. He remembered the first time he'd understood what she was. Arrival's men had crowded into the back office of the marina during a sit-down, 6 of them, filling the little room with cologne and threat, trying to rattle the accountant into a mistake while their boss watched. Cosima had never looked up from her adding machine. She had finished her column, set down her pencil, and asked the largest man present, very politely, to stop leaning on the desk, because his weight was tilting the floor and throwing off her nines. The room had laughed. The moment had broken. She had won the whole negotiation without raising her voice, and Lazaro had watched her from the doorway and thought, with something close to fear, "There is a person here I cannot afford to lose." Then, 5 months ago, the line between them had broken. Once. A single night after they buried his father, when the whole ordered world had come off its hinges, and for a few dark hours neither of them had been the boss or the bookkeeper. Only two people who had somehow survived the same fire. In the morning, she had rebuilt the wall higher than it had ever been. She'd gone cool and precise and perfectly correct, and he had told himself that was mutual, that it was for the best, that men like him did not get to keep soft things. He had told himself a great many convenient things since then. He'd noticed, of course. He noticed everything. It was his profession. He had noticed that she'd stopped taking wine at the Sunday dinners and let a full glass sit warming beside her plate. He'd noticed her wearing a heavy wool coat indoors through a mild autumn, buttoned to the throat. He'd noticed the little tin of ginger candies that had appeared on her desk, and the way she pressed one under her tongue before meetings. Pale, jaw tight. He had catalogued all of it and filed it under "Not My Business," because he had a merger to build and a bride to stand beside, and because looking too closely at Cosima Farrow had become, somewhere along the way, a thing he no longer let himself do. Now she was 3 deadlines gone. He took out his phone and called her for the 9th time that day. It rang once, twice, and dropped straight into the flat electronic nothing of a voicemail box that had stopped accepting messages hours ago. He stood very still, the fog pressing gray against the glass, and felt the boredom in his chest curdle into something with edges. "Have HR replace her," Isolde said, misreading his face entirely. She uncrossed her legs and stood, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. "Honestly, Lazaro, a bookkeeper vanishes, and you look like someone shot your dog. My father lands tomorrow. We have the seating, the toast, the press. She isn't a bookkeeper." His voice didn't rise. It dropped, which was worse, into the low register that had emptied rooms. "She is the only living person who knows where the money sleeps. If she's gone, then either she's selling us to your father, room by room, or something has happened to her that I should have seen coming. Then send one of your men." He was already reaching for his coat. "I don't send men to handle the things that matter," he said. "I handle those myself." By the time the elevator doors sealed him into the mirrored dark and dropped him toward the street, Lazaro had made his decision, and had noticed something about it that unsettled him more than any missing account. He should have been afraid of what she had stolen from him. Instead, some colder and older instinct kept insisting he should be far more afraid of what someone had done to her. The address his security chief sent made him read it twice. Lazaro sat in the back of the black car, with the phone in his hand and the city sliding past the tinted glass, and he stared at 2 lines of text as though they were written in a language he'd only half learned. Cosima Farrow. 14 Varick Row, Unit 3. Varick Row was in the old cannery district, down where the map went vague and the streetlights were shot out for privacy, where the only businesses left standing were the kind that didn't put names on their doors. He paid her enough to live anywhere she wanted. He had assumed, the way he assumed the watch would keep time and the tide would keep turning, that his money had bought her a life somewhere, with a doorman and clean elevators, and a view of something other than rust. "You sure about this one, boss?" Emil asked from the front, easing the car off the expressway and down toward the water. He was a broad, quiet man who had driven for the family since Lazaro's father ran it, and he had the good sense to sound worried without sounding afraid. "This is bad ground. We don't have friends down here." "Drive," Lazaro said. The city changed around them the way a face changes when the smile drops. The glass towers of the Meridian gave way to squat brick and boarded glass, to chain fences sagging under kudzu, to a stray dog trotting down the yellow line with its ribs showing. Fog rolled up off the harbor and pooled in the low streets, and under it hung the smell of the district, brine, diesel, wet ash, and the Swedish rot of the old fish canneries that had closed before Lazaro was born and never been torn down. Rain began to needle the windshield, fine and cold. He wound his father's watch a quarter turn out of habit and made himself stop. He kept trying to build the case against her, because the case against her was the comfortable one. She had the codes. She had the access. Ambrose Deverell would pay a fortune for a woman who could hand him the Corvi money map on a single drive, and men had betrayed Lazaro for far less than Deverell could offer. It would even be a kind of relief, in its way a clean betrayal he knew how to answer, a wound he could cauterize. He had a whole vocabulary for people who sold him out. He had no vocabulary at all for the other possibility, so he kept his mind pointed hard away from it. But the details wouldn't lie still. The warm glass of untouched wine, the coat buttoned to the throat in a warm room, the tin of ginger candies and the pale set of her jaw. 3 missed deadlines from a woman who, in 6 years, had once filed a report from a hospital bed with a broken wrist because she didn't want him to worry. Cosima Farrow did not vanish. Cosima Farrow was the fixed point the rest of them navigated by. If she had come off her orbit, then some force he had not accounted for had reached into his ordered world and pulled. And under all of it, quieter and more damning, was the memory of the last time he'd truly spoken to her. A week ago, in his study, she'd hesitated at the door on her way out. Cosima, who never hesitated, and half turned back to him, and something had moved across her face that he'd never seen there before. He'd been reading a contract. He'd asked, without looking up, whether it could wait until Monday. There had been a small silence. Then she had said, in a voice he only now recognized as strange, "It can wait," and she had gone. He had let her go, the way he let the watch tick, assuming it would always be there to wind again, clean or true. That was the thing she used to ask him, in the early years, before some job that could go 2 ways. Do you want the report clean, or do you want it true? He had always said clean. He wondered now, with the rain coming harder and the fog swallowing the car whole, how many true things she had folded away and carried alone, because the boss preferred them tidy. Here, Emile said, and stopped. Number 14 was a 4-story brick box, slouched between 2 condemned twins, its face streaked black with a century of harbor damp. There was no buzzer. The front door's glass had been knocked out and patched with a warped sheet of plywood gone soft at the corners. A single bulb burned behind it, brown and failing. "Stay with the car," Lazaro said. "Keep it running. If I'm not down in 15 minutes, don't come up. Burn everything and call Fausto." He said his uncle's name the way you name the one adult left standing when the others are gone. He stepped out into the rain. It went through the shoulders of his coat at once, cold as the harbor. He didn't hurry. He crossed the cracked sidewalk with the slow, deliberate weight of a man walking toward something he already knows he cannot unsee, and pushed the plywood door. It scraped inward. The stairwell breathed out at him, cold air, kerosene, mildew, and underneath all of it, something sour and human and wrong, a smell his body understood before his mind would let it. He climbed. 2nd floor, 3rd. A television muttered through a wall, a baby cried and no one came. On the 4th floor landing, there was one door, and it was not shut. It stood open 2 inches on a dark seam, and from that seam, the wrong smell poured out cold around his ankles. And Lazaro Corvi, who had walked calmly into rooms full of men who wanted him dead, found that he could not, for one long second, make his hand reach out and push. Then the second passed, and he was himself again, and the pistol was in his hand without his remembering having drawn it. He went in low and fast, sweeping the barrel across the dark the way he'd been taught before he was old enough to shave. The door gave onto a single room that had wanted to be a home and long ago quit trying. His eyes adjusted. His training told him clear the space, and he cleared it. And what he found emptied him out worse than any ambush could have. There was almost nothing in it. No sofa, no television. No pictures on the sickly green walls, no rug over the scarred wood. Nothing to say a person had built a life here. A card table stood under the single shaded window, with a folding chair tucked neatly beneath it. A mattress on the floor, with the blankets squared off at the corners, with a soldier's discipline. It was freezing, colder inside than the stairwell. The radiator under the window silent and stone dead. A cheap kerosene heater, standing cold in the corner, because the fuel had run out. This was not the apartment of a woman he paid enough to buy a house. This was the burrow of someone dug in for a siege, spending nothing, taking up as little room in the world as a living person could. And by the door, packed and waiting, sat a single canvas duffel. He crouched and opened it with 2 fingers, the gun still up, clothes rolled tight, a brick of cash, banded, more than he'd have guessed, and far less than she was owed. A bus ticket, a real paper one, the kind that leaves no digital wake, for a line that ran 2 states inland to nowhere, and a flat gray external drive, the twin of the ones she used to hold the whole clean architecture of his money. For one ugly heartbeat, the comfortable story clicked into place. She copied it. She was running. You were right to come. The suspicion was almost a mercy. It gave the fear somewhere to stand. But the story wouldn't hold, because a woman selling him out to Ambrose Deverell would be flying private to safety, not buying a paper ticket to a town with 1 traffic light. A woman selling him out would not be freezing in the dark to save on kerosene. This was not the nest of a traitor. This was the last inch of a person trying to disappear so completely that the world he ran would never find the thread and pull. He didn't stop there. Some part of him had already understood, and was making the rest of him gather evidence before it would let him believe. He moved through the little room, touching things, the squared-off blankets, the single chipped mug, drying beside the camp stove, the heavy wool coat hung on a nail by the door, the coat he'd watched her button to the throat through a warm autumn and never once asked about. In the shallow cabinet over the sink, he found a bottle of prenatal vitamins, its label worn soft from handling, and beside it a second, cheaper bottle, generic, the kind you buy when the first runs out and the money's gone tight. His hands were not quite steady when he set them down, and taped inside the cabinet door, where a person keeps the one thing they can't bear to pack and can't bear to lose, was a small square of glossy paper, an ultrasound. Gray static resolved into the unmistakable curl of a spine, the round of a skull, a hand no bigger than a fingernail held up as though it were waving. Someone had written a date along the white border in Cosima's small, precise hand, and beneath it a single word, pressed hard enough to dent the paper. Ours, not mine, ours. Written by a woman who was planning never to let him see it. He closed the cabinet as gently as you'd close a door on a sleeping child. And it was only then, with his eyes finally willing to read the room, that he saw the rest of what it had been hiding. The splintered leg of the folding chair kicked into the corner, the long dark scuff on the door frame at the height of his shoulder, the quiet evidence everywhere now of a struggle a pregnant woman had already lost. Cosima, he said. His voice came out wrong in the empty room, too loud, too hard, a boss's voice with nothing to command. Nothing answered but the rain against the shade and, under it, so faint he'd have missed it in any room with furniture to soften the edges, a sound, a thin, caught intake of breath. Key. The particular private noise a person makes when they are trying with everything left in them not to make any noise at all. It came from behind the half-open bathroom door, where a low, failing light leaked yellow across the floorboards. And now that he was looking, he saw the other thing his eyes had refused to hand him on the way in, a dark, uneven smear, along the base of the wall, leading there, not spatter a trail. the mark of someone who had crossed this floor without being able to lift their own weight off it. The pistol felt suddenly absurd in his hand. He set it on the card table, and the small clack of metal on cheap laminate was the loudest thing in the world. Then he crossed the room, past the mattress, past the cold heater, past the thin dark trail, and he pushed the bathroom door, the rest of the way open. She was on the floor. Casimiro sat wedged into the narrow gap between the tub and the wall, under a bare bulb that hummed on its wire, and for one disorienting instant, Lazaro's mind simply refused the picture, the way a hand jerks back from a stove. She was wearing a man's flannel shirt, too big for her, and a blanket had slipped off one shoulder. Her skin was the gray-white of candle wax. Her lower lip was split and crusted dark, and a bruise the color of a storm sky spread from her cheekbone down into the collar of the shirt. The print, he understood with a cold drop in his gut, of a hand. Someone had put a hand on her. Someone had held her by the face. Then the blanket slid the rest of the way down, and he saw the curve of her. The world tilted on some axis. He hadn't known it turned on. The flannel was open over a long thermal shirt pulled tight, and beneath it, her belly was round, unmistakable. Months and months of a truth she had buttoned under wool and carried past him 100 times while he read his contracts and chose his rings. Pregnant. 5 months. 6. His mind lunged at the arithmetic before he could stop it, and landed hard, on a single night. 5 months gone, on the only time the wall between them had ever come down. Every suspicion he had carried up 4 flights of stairs, died at once, and left nothing behind it but a roaring, hollow terror. "You're bleeding," he said. It was all his mouth could find. There was blood, not from the lip, not from the bruise, but darker and worse, soaked into the towel wadded beneath her, and the sharp iron of it was the wrong smell that had reached him on the landing. Her eyes dragged open. They were fever-bright and unfocused, but somewhere far back in them, the old, level intelligence flickered up through the haze and found him, and her cracked mouth moved. "Of course you'd pick tonight," she rasped. "I had a plan." It was a good plan. "You were supposed to be trying on cufflinks. Cosima, don't." She flinched as a cramp took her, her hand pressed flat and hard to the underside of her belly, knuckles bloodless, and she rode it out, with her jaw locked, breathing in short bitten pulls, until it passed. When she could speak again, her voice was thinner. "Don't do the face. The one where you decide something. I know that face. I built half my walls to keep out of range of that face." He was already on his knees on the freezing tile, and he didn't feel the cold, and he didn't feel his $3,000 trousers soaking through in her blood. He took her wrist, gently, gently, a thing his hands had forgotten how to be, and found the pulse there going too fast and too light, a bird beating itself against glass. "How long?" he said. His voice had gone very quiet. "How long have you been on this floor? What day is it?" She almost smiled. Then, "That long. And this." He didn't look at her belly. He couldn't. "Quite, yet. How long?" "Long enough that I'm out of clever ways to say it." The fever pulled at her, and she let her head roll back against the tub, and a tear cut a clean line down through the gray. "It's yours. Obviously, it's yours. Do you think I do this with anyone else?" A broken breath that wanted to be a laugh. "I was going to send you a card, someday, from very, very far away." Something in his chest that had been ice for 5 months cracked straight across. He shrugged out of his soaked coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, uselessly, needing to do something with hands that wanted to shake. She was so cold, and the room was so cold, and under the thin towel the dark kept patiently spreading. She was watching his face the whole time, reading it the way she'd read a room full of enemies, waiting for the verdict she'd find there. 4 days? He said, and it wasn't a question anymore. "You were on this floor for 4 days. You had a phone, you had my private line, you had 6 years of me, never once telling you no. And you chose this." "I chose her," Cosima breathed. "You were getting married. 300 guests, A whole city watching. If I'd called, you'd have come. I know you, you'd have come. And then every one of them would have seen exactly where to cut you. Her eyes slid shut, and she hauled them open again by force. I did the math, Lazaro. I'm very good at math. A dead bookkeeper is a Tuesday. A boss with a secret pregnant woman is a door left standing open. I was not going to be the door. He pressed his palm flat and light just below the curve of her, half expecting to feel nothing, and felt instead a faint, stubborn shift against his hand, a life insisting on itself in the middle of all that blood and cold. His vision blurred. He blinked it hard away, because tears were a luxury, and what she needed from him now was a surgeon's steadiness, not a father's terror. He didn't shout. He didn't ask the 20 questions clawing up his throat. He put one hand to the uninjured side of her face, warm palm against burning skin, and he made his voice into the flat, calm instrument he used when a room was one wrong word from catching fire, because she needed calm now, more than she needed the truth of what was happening inside him. Listen to me. You are not going to argue with me, and you are not going to plan around me, not tonight. I am going to pick you up. There is a doctor who will meet us, and he is very good, and he owes me his life twice over. He took his phone out with his free hand and thumbed a message to Emil without looking away from her eyes. Up now. Bring the blanket from the trunk. Call the doctor. Code black. Say pregnant. Bleeding. 5 months. And drive like it. You held on this long. You are going to hold on the length of a car ride. That's all I'm asking. 1 car ride. Lazaro. Her hand came up off her belly and closed around his forearm, with a strength that shocked him, all of it gathered into the last thing she had. Her eyes were suddenly terribly clear. It wasn't a mugging. It wasn't random. The man who put me on this floor, he wasn't one of Deverell's. The bathroom seemed to shrink around them, the bulb humming, the rain far away. Then whose? Lazaro said. Her mouth opened. Then, a fresh cramp folded her double, a low animal sound tore out of her, and beneath the towel the dark spread wider, and her eyes rolled white as the pain took the answer with it. He carried her down the 4 flights faster than was safe, cradling her against his chest, her head lolling into the hollow of his throat, and she weighed so little that the wrongness of it fed a rage he had no room for yet. Emil met him on the second landing with the trunk blanket, and one look at his boss's face that told him not to ask. They wrapped her. They ran. In the back of the car she surfaced again, as the streetlight strobed across her face, and Lazaro pressed the folded blanket to her, and pressed his palm over that, and he made her keep talking because he had read somewhere, in another life, that you keep them talking, you keep them here. Stay with me. Whose man? Say it. Clean, she breathed. Or true? The old question. Their question from the early years, before every job that could go 2 ways. Do you want it clean, or do you want it true? And every single time he had chosen clean, had chosen the tidy version, had let her carry the true one alone into the dark. He bent his head, close to hers. True, he said. Give me the true one. All of it. I'm done with clean. So she gave it to him in fragments, between the streetlights, between the cramps, in the flat, efficient cadence she used for a briefing even now, even here, because it was the only armor she had left. The Deverell alliance was not an alliance. It never had been. Ambrose Deverell did not want to marry his rail to the Corvyports. He wanted to swallow them, and a wedding was only the cleanest way to get his people inside the walls. But Deverell could not have moved a single piece without a hand already inside the Corvy house. Someone who had spent months quietly copying to the rail exactly what Cosima had spent 6 years hiding from the world, where the money slept, which cops were paid, which captains could be turned. She had found the leak 8 weeks ago, a seam of numbers that didn't close, a shell company reaching back toward home. She had started pulling the thread, and then, 4 weeks ago, the same hand had found her seam. had learned that the boss's bookkeeper was carrying the boss's child. That changed everything for them, she said. And even wrecked. Even gray. Her voice went cold and clear with the shape of the logic. A Corvi heir. A real one, with a claim, with your blood. It doesn't matter that I never wanted the throne for it. It matters that it exists. You marry Isolde in 2 days. You have a clean heir waiting up the coast the moment they need you gone. But a Corvi baby, already breathing, already yours. That's a loose end that unravels the whole plan, she swallowed. So the plan became, erase the loose end before the wedding. Quietly. An accident, a mugging in a bad part of town, where a woman had no business living, no one would even look. The man came 4 days ago to finish it. How did you get out? He asked. Because he had to keep her talking. And because he needed, suddenly, to know that she had fought. I didn't get out. I got lucky, and then I got mean. A thread of the old iron came back into the ruin of her voice. He was told to make it look like a robbery, so he didn't come in shooting. He came in slow, wanting my keys and my codes, wanting it quiet. That was his mistake. I keep a paring knife taped under the card table for exactly the kind of quiet that walks through a door at 2 in the morning. Her split lips pulled. I put it in his thigh, and I took the stairs, and I made it 3 blocks in the rain. Before the cramping started, I've been going back and forth to that bathroom ever since, deciding whether to bleed out or wait for it to stop. It kept not stopping, and the drive copied everything the night I found the leak. I've been carrying it taped against my ribs for a month, a weak, furious breath. If they'd managed to kill me, it was going to your lawyer with a delivery date on it. Even dead, I was going to hand you the name. Lazaro sat with the blood warm under his hand and the city tearing past and understood, with a calm that frightened him, that he was going to kill someone very slowly before this was over. The name, he said, you know it. You've known it since the landing. Who inside my house? Her eyes found his. There was pity in them, and exhaustion, and something almost like an apology, because she knew what the name was going to do to him. And even now, bleeding in the back of his car, she was trying to spare him the weight of it. It's the drive, she whispered instead. In the bag. Everything's on the drive, the transfers, the copies, his voice. I couldn't come to you without proof. If I'd come to you with only my word. 2 days before your wedding, carrying your child, her cracked mouth twisted, you'd have thought I was the loose end trying to blow up your merger to keep you. You'd have looked at me with the face. Cosima, the name. But the car was slamming to a stop under a hard white light, and there were hands at the door, and Aurelio's people were lifting her out of his arms, and her fingers slipped from his sleeve, and the name went with her through the doors into a place he wasn't allowed to follow. The clinic took up the top floor of a pain practice the family owned outright, 3 blocks off the water, with a surgical suite better than most hospitals, and a waiting room that had never once held anyone waiting, because the men who came here did not bring family. Lazaro used it now. He wore a path from the door to the window and back, and somewhere in the second hour he stopped, pretending he was the sort of man who didn't pace. Emile sat with the canvas duffel between his boots and the locked gray drive sealed in a freezer bag on his knee, and said nothing, which was the most useful thing anyone had done for Lazaro all night. On the drive from Varick Row he'd tried to open it once, in the front seat at a red light, and found it walled behind a passphrase and a wipe counter that gave him 3 attempts before it turned itself to slag. He'd handed it to Emile and not touched it again. Cosima had built that lock. Cosima would open it or no one would. He kept his father's watch in his fist. He'd stopped winding it somewhere back on the stairs and started simply holding it, thumb over the scratched crystal, the way you hold a coin you're afraid to spend. It was past 11. Soon it would want winding, and he was not sure his hands would be steady enough to do it, and that small anticipated failure frightened him more than the men he'd have to kill. When Aurelio finally came through the doors, he was drying his hands, and his face was doing the careful thing doctors' faces do when the news is good but the memory of Nearly isn't. She's alive. They're both alive. He let Lazaro have 3 full seconds of that before the rest. It's called an abruption, part of the placenta tore away. Trauma set it going. The cold and the hunger and 4 days of terror on a bathroom floor did the rest. A few more hours, and I'd have been telling you a very different sentence. 2 of them. He pulled off the cap. The bleeding stopped. The heart strong, stubborn, actually like the mother. But she stays flat, she stays warm, she stays calm, and I mean genuinely calm, or it opens again, and I can't promise it twice. No stress, no arguments, nothing that spikes her pressure, a dry look. So, naturally I'm delivering her into your care. Can I see her? For a minute she's under, mostly. Don't wake her. They let him in. She lay small in the white bed under a warming blanket, tubes at her arm, the bruise on her face gone livid under the surgical light, and beside her, a monitor drew a fast green line and filled the room with a sound Lazaro had never in his life stood inside of. A quick, wet, galloping flutter, far too fast to be a grown heart, insistent as a fist on a door. The baby. His. He stood over the 2 of them, the killer of a great many men, and found that his eyes had gone hot and his throat had closed, and that the ordered world he had spent 40 years building had just been quietly, permanently repriced. Everything he owned, everything he was. He'd have traded the whole of it, at that moment, to keep that ridiculous frantic sound going 1 more minute. He set 2 fingers, very lightly, against the curve of the blanket over her belly, the way you'd touch something that might break, or might break you. For a moment, he could not make himself leave the sound. 40 years he had measured his life in things a man could count: dollars, men, ports, favors owed to him. And the entire ledger of it had just been outbid by a noise, a machine made in a rented room. He had built an empire, to feel safe, and had never, until this exact second, felt the specific animal terror of holding something he could not afford to lose. It was unbearable. It was the first entirely real thing that had happened to him in years. Aurelia watched from the doorway, and for once, kept the edge out of his voice. She hid it well, he offered instead. A woman that far along, working beside you every day, I've delivered for families who'd have noticed a new haircut. She kept a whole life invisible, because she decided your safety outweighed her own. That isn't shame, Lazaro. Where I come from, we have a different word for it. You might try earning it. He paused at the door. She'll need months of quiet after tonight, and a reason to believe quiet is safe. You've never once given anyone alive a reason to believe that. Then he went out into the corridor and made the call. It rang twice. Lazaro. Isolde's voice was already sharpened for a fight. My father has been trying to reach you for 3 hours. Wherever you are, whatever this is, you need to be at the house by 9 tomorrow, or there's no wedding, Isolde. A pause. Brittle. You don't get to say that. Do you understand what you're? Listen to me, because I'll only lay it out once, and then this number stops existing. His voice was terribly even, the voice from the end of the world. There is no wedding. There is no merger. Your father means to plant his people inside my walls in 2 nights, and to clear the way. One of them followed my bookkeeper home days ago, put his hand around her throat, and left her to bleed out alone on a cold floor. She is 22 weeks pregnant. The child is mine. Your father ordered that. He let it land. So there's no gala, no toast, no seating chart, no press. There's just the part where you decide, in the next few seconds, whether you want to be standing next to him when I answer it. The silence that came back was not the silence of a woman defending her father. It was the silence of a woman who has just been handed a piece of her own life. She was never shown. A long, airless, changed silence. And in it Lazaro heard, faint and unmistakable, the sound of something he hadn't expected to find in Isolde Deverell at all. Sal. I didn't know about a girl, she said finally, very low. And then, before he could weigh it, Lazaro, whatever you think you understand tonight, you're missing a piece. My father doesn't have the nerve to reach inside your house alone. Someone opened the door for him. The line clicked dead. He lowered the phone. Missing a piece. He knew that already. The name was locked in a freezer bag on Emil's knee. But the way she'd said it put a cold finger on the back of his neck, and in that exact moment, the phone came alive in his hand, buzzing, lit, and the name on the screen was the one name in the world he had never once thought to be afraid of. Fausto. He looked at his uncle's name, glowing in his palm, for one long beat, and for the first time in his life, some animal at the base of his brain told him not to answer honestly. He'd learned to trust that animal. It had kept him alive. "Uncle," he said, warm, easy, a nephew's voice. There you are, relief, thick and paternal, poured down the line. Fausto Corvi had a voice like aged wood, the voice that had read to him at 8 and eulogized his father at 39. The whole city's on fire, boy. The Deverells are calling my house screaming that you've thrown over the wedding. Ambrose is talking about war. Where are you? Come to me. Let me put my arms around this thing before it burns us all down. We'll fix it. We always fix it. Come to me. 2 hours ago. Lazaro would have gone without a thought, would have laid the whole night at the old man's feet and let him carry it. Instead, he heard himself lie, smooth as water. It's handled, uncle. Misunderstanding with the caterers of all things. I'm at the marina running numbers. I'll come by in the morning, once I've slept. He listened to the small silence on the other end, a beat too long. A fisherman, feeling the line go slack, and it turned his stomach to ice. Get some rest. It's late for you. Of course, Fausto said warmly. In the morning. And hung up. Lazaro stood very still. He wanted my location. It was the thinnest thing, a shadow of a shadow, and he hated himself for seeing it. But he'd spent his life reading exactly that catch, in exactly that kind of voice, and he could not now unhear it, in the one voice he'd never thought to read. He stood alone in the corridor, with the phone still warm in his palm, and did the coldest arithmetic of his life. If Fausto was the hand inside the house, and the animal in his gut was already certain, even while the rest of him refused it, then the whole board tilted. The failsafe he'd whispered on the stairs of Varick Row, "Burn everything and call Fausto," had been an instruction to lay his own head on the block. The man he'd have trusted with Cosima's life, with his unborn child's, was the man who had already priced them both and found them cheap. He couldn't prove it yet. The proof was locked in a freezer bag he couldn't crack. But he built the rest of the night on the assumption anyway, because he had learned long ago that when the animal and the evidence disagreed, you bet on the animal and apologized later if you were lucky enough to have been wrong. He already knew he wasn't going to be that lucky. They moved her before dawn, wrapped and monitored, in the back of a windowless van, up the long private road to the house on the bluff. He carried her himself from the van to the warmest room in the place, not the sterile guest wing, but the small sunroom off his own quarters, the one with the stone fireplace his mother had loved, and he had Emil build the fire up until the old chimney roared. Aurelio rigged the monitors. The frantic green gallop filled the room again, and Lazaro found he needed it now, the way other men needed prayer. When did she last eat a real meal? Aurelio asked him quietly, taping down a line. Before tonight. Gus. Lazaro didn't answer, because the honest answer was, I never once asked. Her body's been eating itself for months, the doctor went on. Not unkindly, but he was a man who believed guilt was a medicine best given at full dose. She's been carrying your child through a winter with no heat, on almost no food, spending nothing, hiding it all under a coat, 2 sizes too big, so the sharpest man in the city wouldn't notice the one thing right in front of him. That takes a kind of will I don't have. It also nearly killed her twice over, and you should know that and you should carry it. He straightened. She'll sleep till morning, wake her and I'll shoot you myself. When the doctor had gone, Lazaro sat on the floor by the fire, with the canvas duffel, and because he could not sit still inside his own skin, he unpacked it, slowly, item by item. as though her few belongings might tell him how to be forgiven. The rolled clothes, the banded cash, and, tucked in a side pocket where a person keeps the thing that matters, a small dented tin of ginger candies and a folded paper bus ticket to a nowhere town, 2 states inland, one way dated the day after tomorrow, the day of his wedding. He held the ticket for a long time. She'd meant to be gone before he ever said his vows, to vanish with his child into a life so small and so far that the ports and the guns and the Corvi name would never reach it. She'd chosen exile over becoming the thing she most despised, a liability chained to his ankle, a reason for a man to be weak. He set the ticket on the hearthstone and did not burn it, because it was hers, and he had spent 6 years deciding things that were hers. The ginger candies sat in their dented tin on the hearth beside it. He worked the lid off. 3 left. He thought of all the little tins that had appeared on her desk over the months, the pale jaw before every meeting, the whole quiet vocabulary of a body doing the hardest work there is, and every bit of it filed under, "Not my business," by a man who saw everything and understood none of it. He had to set the tin down and press the heels of his hands into his eyes, until the thing rising in his chest agreed to sit back down. He built the fire higher, instead, and dragged a second chair close to the bed, where he could watch both her face and the green line climbing and falling beside it. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed the half-hour, and he realized with a small, cold jolt that he had missed the midnight winding, the first time in 9 years he had let the watch run down. He drew it out. The second hand had stopped at 11:51. He didn't wind it. He sat with the stopwatch cold in his palm, and understood at last that he had built his entire ritual, noon and midnight, a thing you keep running keeps running, on a lie. Nothing kept running on its own. Everything he had ever counted on had been held up, all this time, by someone standing quietly just out of frame, winding it whenever he looked away. He had called it order. It had been her. Then he took the sealed gray drive from Emile, and he sat with it in the firelight, and tried uselessly to make it give him the name. 3 attempts. He had 3. He didn't waste one. The lock was hers. The truth was hers. The name of the man who'd done this was hers to hand him, and she was 12 feet away with a machine counting the heartbeat he'd nearly lost, and he could not wake her to ask. He was still sitting there, drive in one hand, dead watch in the other, when he heard it, the soft, dragging scrape of something crossing the hardwood in the hall. Not a guard's step, a wheel, and a bare foot, and a caught breath. She was up. He was on his feet and into the hall in 3 strides, and there she was, upright, barely, one hand white-knuckled on the ivy pole she was using as a crutch. The other braced flat to the wall, wearing one of his old shirts that swallowed her whole. She had crossed nearly 20 feet of house on a body that 4 hours ago had been giving out. Her face was gray and furious and entirely awake. "You're going to tear it open," he said low, moving to her. Aurelio said, "Aurelio doesn't know what's on the drive." Her voice was a ruin, but it was level. "You can't read it. You got the whole army in the world, and you're sitting in there losing to a passphrase, aren't you?" Her cracked mouth almost smiled. "You need me upright for exactly 4 minutes. Then you can tie me to the bed." He should have carried her back. He looked at her, at the raw terror under the fury, the specific terror of a person whose entire worth in her own accounting was in being useful and never ever a burden, and he understood that lying down right now would cost her more than the walk had. So he did the thing that a lifetime of his father's training screamed against. He put an arm around her, took her weight entirely onto himself, and walked her to the desk like a partner instead of a patient. 4 minutes, he said against her hair. "Then you rest. And that's not a negotiation. That's the only vow I'm making tonight." He set her in his chair. She pulled the sealed drive from the bag, cracked the freezer seal, and plugged it in with fingers that shook from fever and did the work anyway. muscle memory outrunning the tremor. Passphrase. A second key, from a string of numbers she carried in her head, and nowhere else the screen bloomed open. "Here's the leak I found 8 weeks ago," she said. And the briefing voice came back, flat and clean and merciless. The voice that had won a room full of enforcers without looking up. Money leaving the marina in slices too small to trip anything. Routed through a rail freight shell up the coast, Deverell's bank on the far end. That's the takeover. Funded with your own money. Windows stacked. Transfers. Timestamps. But a shell doesn't know your captains by name. It doesn't know which harbor cops take an envelope and which one wears a wire. Whoever fed Deverell knew the whole house from the inside. So I went looking for the hand. She clicked. And I found it. An audio file. She hovered the cursor and looked up at him. And there it was again in her eyes. The pity. The apology. The last useless instinct to spare him. "You don't want to hear his voice," she said quietly. "But you have to. Or you'll doubt it at the wrong moment. And it'll get you killed." She pressed play. The room filled with aged wood. "The girl's the problem now, not the marriage. She's carrying his. You understand what that means. It has to look like nothing. A bad street. A bad night. A woman who lived where she shouldn't. Do it before the wedding. And Ambrose gets his ports. And I get to keep my nephew, right where I want him. Grateful. And mine. Don't make it ugly. He'll grieve a secretary. He won't grieve a war." Fausto. The man who had bought him his first knife. The man he told Emil to call 3 hours ago. If he didn't come back down those stairs. Burn everything. And call Fausto, his failsafe. His floor, the last adult standing. Lazaro did not move and did not make a sound. Something vast and structural went silent inside him. A load-bearing wall taken out clean, and what flowed into the empty space where his uncle had stood was not grief and was not rage. It was a cold, level, patient purpose. The coldest thing he had ever felt, and it steadied his hands completely. He played it again. He made himself. The second time he listened, not as a nephew, but as the man who would shortly have to walk into a room and end this, listening, for the ease in it, the way Fausto said he'll grieve a secretary, the way another man might order fish off a menu. There was no hesitation anywhere in the recording. This was not a weak man cornered into a betrayal. This was a patient one who had been building it across years, who had held Lazaro's whole childhood in his 2 hands and decided somewhere along the way that the child would eventually be standing in his light. Lazaro switched it off. The quiet that came after was very clean. "How long?" he asked. "The transfers start 14 months ago," Cosima said. "The first contact with Deverell's bank, 11. He started laying it, while your father was still breathing." "And he didn't do it for Deverell," she went on, watching his face, needing him to understand the whole shape of it. "He used Deverell. He resented your father for passing him over. Resented you for being born the heir he raised and could never be. The plan was never to hand you to the rail and walk away. It was to let Ambrose bleed you, and then take what was left, the name, the ports, the clean empire I built, for himself. You were always the thing standing on what he thought was his." "When?" Lazaro said. "One word. With the wedding off, his timeline's gone. He'll move tonight, before you can change a single lock or turn a single captain against him. He'll go to Basin 9 and open the counting house to Deverell's men. Himself, hand over the vault and the ledgers, and by sunrise he owns the only leverage that matters. And you're a boss with empty hands." Her jaw tightened. "He thinks you're at a hospital watching your woman die. He thinks you're broken. That's the only edge you have. He doesn't know you're standing up." An unknown number lit Lazaro's phone. He almost ignored it. Then some instinct, the same animal, made him answer, and Isol Deverell's voice came through, stripped of every ounce of its ice. "They're sending men to your house. A second team, right now, to take the girl and the proof while your uncle takes the docks." I'm looking at the message. A breath. I didn't know they meant to kill her, Lazaro. I want that on the record, before whatever happens next. I'm not my father, and she was gone. Lazaro set the phone down very gently, which was how Emil, watching from the doorway, knew the night had just turned into something with no bottom. He crouched by the desk and thought, fast and cold, the way the family had trained him to think when the whole board was on fire. 2 teams meant Fausto had committed everything tonight. There would be nothing left guarding his flank. It meant the counting house at Basin 9 would be thin, a handful of Deverell's imported muscle, and one old man with a ring of stolen keys. Every one of them certain that Lazaro Corvi was 3 miles away, watching a woman die. Their certainty was the whole of his advantage, and certainty was a thing a man could only spend once. I need you to do something only you can do, he said to Cosima, and watched the words land. Watch the flicker of pure relief cross her wrecked face at being handed a task instead of a blanket. Copy that drive 3 times. 1 stays in this house, 1 goes to Emil, 1 goes somewhere. Only you will ever know. If tonight goes wrong, that recording lands in the hands of every enemy the Deverells have, gift-wrapped. Make me impossible to erase. He didn't quite look at the curve of her. Make her impossible to erase. Now that, Cosima murmured, already reaching for the second drive with shaking hands, is the smartest thing you've said in 6 years. You were always the one who was going to bury them, he said. You just did it with a spariate instead of a gun. Something that wanted to be a smile crossed her face before the fever pulled it back under. Emil, calm. 2 teams. You take 6 men and you turn this house into a wall. They want her and the drive. They get neither, and anyone who comes up that road doesn't go back down it. I want her breathing when I get home. He crouched by Cosima's chair, eye to eye. You've done your 4 minutes more than. You gave me the name and you gave me the map and you kept this whole empire alive from a bathroom floor. Now you do the last hard thing, which is nothing. You lie down. You keep the heart going. You let me carry a weight for once. Lazaro. Her hand caught his wrist. Her eyes were wet and clear. Don't make me raise it alone because you needed to be the one holding the gun. Come back. He didn't promise, because she'd have known a promise, for the lie it might be. Instead, he took his father's watch. Stopped now. Run down in his own fist for the first time in 9 years. The one steady thing that had turned out to need winding after all, and he pressed it into her palm and closed her fingers over it. It's stopped on me tonight, he said. First time in 9 years. Wind it back up. Keep it running till I'm home to do it myself. He stood. At the door he paused, not turning. Clean or true? Cosima? True, she whispered. Always. Now. True, he agreed. Then here's the true one. I should have seen you 6 years ago. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up the difference. And he walked out into the dark to go kill the man who raised him. Basin 9 sat at the black end of the marina where the good boats didn't tie up a low concrete counting house behind a chain gate, and the fog had come in so thick off the water that the sodium lamps hung in it like drowned moons. Lazaro left the cars a quarter-mile out and came the rest of the way on foot with 8 men who moved like they weren't there, and he did not feel the cold, and he did not feel his own pulse. He felt only the level, patient nothing that had opened in him when his uncle's voice came out of the machine Emil had wanted to come. Lazaro had left him on the bluff instead, because there was exactly one thing in the world he could not lose tonight, and it was asleep by a fire behind a wall, and the only man he trusted to hold that wall was the one who'd driven his father before him. So it was Cato at his shoulder now, and 7 others, men born in the harbor district, who could move through fog like it was a room in their own house. They cut the chain at the gate with bolt cutters wrapped in rag, so that even that made no sound, and filtered into the stacks of shipping containers 2 by 2, and took their angles, and waited on his word. He had expected to feel something on that last quarter mile. Grief maybe, the sick downward pull of it, the man who had read to him at 8, standing at the end of a dock waiting to be killed. He felt nothing but clarity. Grief was a thing that came later if you lived, and he had decided somewhere on the private road that he would let himself have it only after the two hearts on the bluff were safe. Until then he was simply a very precise instrument, walking downhill in the dark. It was, he thought distantly, the last operation the family would ever run against itself. After tonight the house would have only one head, and it would be his, and it would be clean. Two of Deverell's box trucks were already back to the loading bay, engines ticking, empty and waiting to be filled with another man's leverage. 3 of the rail's enforcers lounged at the bay mouth, with long guns slung, and the loose confidence of men who'd been told this was a delivery, not a fight. And in the open door of the counting house, under a worklight, stood Fausto Corvi, with a ring of keys in his hand. Lazaro's keys, the house keys, the keys of the family, fitting one to the inner vault as calmly as a man opening his own front door. "Kill the lights," Lazaro said into his collar. The marina went black. It was fast, and it was quiet, and it was not a fight so much as a correction. The suppressed rifles from the containers coughed their flat mechanical coughs. The first enforcer folded before the dark had finished falling. The second got half a shout out before a second suppressed round closed his throat. The third emptied a panicked burst into the fog at nothing and was gone a breath later. Then the silence came back down over the water, ringing, total. And it belonged to Lazaro. He gave it a slow 5 count. In his experience, the important thing after violence was the silence you left sitting on top of it, long enough that a man's own imagination did more work than any threat could. So he let Fausto stand alone in the ringing dark with the stink of cordite and salt, and the knowledge arriving late and total, that the certainty he had built his entire plan around had been a lie from the first move. He walked out of it into the worklight, with his gun low, and Fausto turned, and the keys slid out of his hand and rang on the concrete. Lazaro. The old man's face went through 3 things very fast: shock, calculation, and then, catastrophically, the warm paternal mask, snapping back into place over the panic. "Boy, thank God. They forced the vault. I came to stop them." You read to me," Lazaro said. He didn't raise his voice. He never would again tonight. "When I was 8 and couldn't sleep after they killed my mother, you read to me until morning. I have the whole book memorized. I gave it to my hands to hold, coming here, so I wouldn't do something ugly." He stopped 10 feet off. "I heard your voice tonight, Uncle. He'll grieve a secretary. He won't grieve a war." The mask came off then all at once, and what was under it was old and bitter and almost relieved to finally be seen. Fausto straightened. The keys glinted between them on the ground. "She was collateral," he said. "Do you know what your father did to me? He built this on my back, and my blood, and my patience. And when it came time to hand down the chair, he gave it to a boy who cries at a heartbeat monitor. 30 years I was the man you call when the boss dies. 30 years. You held me while I cried for my mother," Lazaro said. "And the whole time, you were already counting the years until you could take what she died, leaving me. I loved you, and the terrible thing was that it rang true. I loved you, and I hated you in the same breath, every day of your life. The way you love and hate the thing that's living the life you were owed. Your father knew it. That's the joke, boy. He knew exactly what I was. And he handed you to me anyway, because he trusted I'd never move against his own blood." The old man spread his hands, and in the worklight, his eyes were wet and flat at the same time. He was almost right. It took me 30 years and a bastard grandchild to finally cost him that bet. The word landed in the fog and hung there. Bastard. Lazaro felt the cold at his center deepen by a single permanent degree. "She has a name," he said. "You'll die without ever learning it. That's the part you should sit with, in whatever seconds you've got left, that you threw away everything you had for a child whose name you were never worth knowing." Fausto's lip curled. "You want to know the truth of it? Since you've suddenly got such an appetite? I was never going to hand Ambrose a thing, let him spend himself cracking you open. I'd have taken the pieces. The name was always going to be mine, one way or the other. His eyes flicked oily over Lazaro's shoulder, toward the road, toward the bluff, and it still might. You're standing here playing Avenger. Where do you think the other half of us is right now? Who's sitting with your little bookkeeper and your unborn heir, while you, the house held, Lazaro said. Fausto stopped. Your second team turned up the private road 40 minutes ago, Lazaro went on, and for the first time, something moved through that iron calm. Not warmth, but its far edge. I had a wall waiting for them. I had a warning I didn't earn. From a woman you people were also going to throw away when you were done with her. They didn't reach the door. She's asleep by a fire, in my mother's room, and my child's heart is still going. And the last thing you got wrong tonight, Uncle, out of everything, the last thing, is that you thought I'd break. He shook his head, slow. You raised me to run this. You just never understood what for. Fausto's hand dove for the pistol at his belt. He was fast. For an old man, he was not the fastest man on that concrete, and had not been for 20 years. Lazaro's gun spoke twice, and the man who had taught him to hold one sat down hard against the vault door. He'd come to rob and slid, and was still. His keys, the family's keys, lay in the spreading dark an inch from his open hand, and Lazaro stepped over and picked them up and put them in his own pocket, where they belonged. For a moment, the only sound was the water working at the pylons and the ticking of the cooling truck engines. Off to the side, one of Deverell's men, the young one Cato had put down with a round through the shoulder, was making a thin, frightened noise against the concrete. Lazaro crossed to him and crouched. A hired body from 3 cities away, no older than 25, who had been told this was a delivery and not a war. You came down here to load trucks, Lazaro said, so go home. Tell Ambrose Deverell what you saw. Tell him the part where the old man had all the keys, and it didn't save him. He looked up at Cato, patched the shoulder, put him in a cab. He's a message, not a body. He looked at the body of the last father he had for a long moment while the fog closed back over the lamps. Leave him, he told his men. Leave the trucks. Leave the vault open, and every light on. He was already turning toward the road, toward the bluff, toward the fire, and the frantic green line and the watch that someone had. Please God remembered to wind. Send Ambrose Deverell a copy of the recording and one line under it. Your inside man is on my floor. Your daughter has better sense than you. Come take the ports if you still want them. He won't. He's got nothing left but a rail and a grudge, and I'll bury both by spring. He stopped at the gate. I'm going home. Dawn came up, gray and clean, over the bluff. As the car climbed the private road, and the house was still standing, and there were 2 of Deverell's men, zip-tied and sullen in the gatehouse, and not one guard of Lazaro's so much as scratched, because Emile had built the wall Lazaro asked for. He'd had Emile's word by radio, from the foot of the private road. House is secure, she's asking for you. Come home, and had made the man repeat the middle of it twice, because in 20 years, nobody had ever radioed Lazaro Corvi to tell him that someone was asking for him. Not wanting a ruling, or a favor, or a debt collected, just asking for him. He had sat with that, the whole climb up the hill, turning it over like a stone he'd found in his pocket and couldn't remember picking up. He didn't stop to gloat. He walked through the quiet house, past the marble and the beeswax, and the tasteful evidence of a life that had suddenly stopped meaning anything, straight to the small warm room off his own. And he opened the door. She was awake. 2. Cosima was propped against the pillows, pale but no longer gray, the monitor beside her drawing its fast green gallop, and in her open right hand, ticking, wound, alive, lay his father's watch. Of course she had. She'd kept everything he owned running for 6 years while he looked the other way. You're bleeding on my floor again, she said, her voice a cracked thread, her eyes shining. Different suit, same problem. It's not mine this time. He crossed the room and sank onto the edge of the bed. and only when he was close enough to feel the warmth coming off her did the level cold finally break apart in his chest and let something human back in. It's done. He's done. The Deverils are finished by any road that touches us. He looked at the watch in her palm. You wound it. The second you put it in my hand, and again, just now, when I heard the car. She turned her hand and let it fall into his, warm from her skin. I was not going to be the reason it stopped. He closed his hand around hers, and the watch inside it, and for a moment, neither of them said anything at all. 6 years of a desk between them, of yes, boss, and it can wait, and a wall built so high and so patiently that he had mistaken it for weather, and it came down now in the space of one held breath, in a warm room, over a watch she had refused to let run down. I read the vitamins, he said, absurdly, because the large things wouldn't come up his throat, in the cabinet at Varick Row, and the picture, taped inside the door. His voice did something it had not done in front of another living person since he was a boy. You wrote ours, I did. Her chin came up. That old defiance, wet-eyed now. It was true. I only ever hid the things that were true. His phone buzzed once against his thigh, a Boston area code. He let it ring twice, let Ambrose Deverell sit one more moment inside the silence he'd built for him, and answered on speaker, because he was done keeping the true things from her. You killed Fausto. Ambrose's voice had lost every ounce of its patriarch's polish. It came through tight and stripped, the voice of a man who has looked into the back of a box truck and seen his own future parked inside it. You slaughtered my crew and sent me back a boy with a hole in his shoulder to tell me about it. This is war. This is an eviction, Lazaro said, and his gaze never left Cosima's face. You reached into my house through my uncle's hand and you sent a man to open a pregnant woman on a bathroom floor. So here's the arrangement, and there's only one. Your rail does not cross my city line. Your money does not touch my ports. And your daughter, who warned me when you would have let me die, and who is worth 10 of you, walks free and clear and unafraid for the rest of her life. Or, I release everything on that drive to every rival you have between here and the border and let them carve you up for sport. Do we understand each other? A long, ragged silence. Then the line went dead, which was the only kind of yes a man like Ambrose Deverell had left in him. Lazaro set the phone face down on the nightstand and did not pick it up again. You protected Isolde, Cosima said, studying him. The cold one. In the settlement. She was a pawn, who found a conscience at the last possible second, he said. I've got no quarrel with people who choose right when it cost them everything. I used to think there weren't any, and what happens to her now? Cosima asked. She goes back up the coast to a father who just lost everything, and knows his own daughter is the reason his last threat still has teeth. I sent her the recording too. She holds the same knife over him that I do. He almost smiled. She'll be running the Deverell rail inside a year, and she'll run it clean. And she'll never once cross my line, because she knows precisely what I'll do, and precisely what she owes. It's the closest thing to a friend I've made in 10 years, and we've exchanged perhaps 40 words. Mafia friendship, Cosima murmured. The only kind that keeps. He reached to the hearthstone where the folded bus ticket still lay, and he picked it up, and he put it in her hand on top of the watch. This is yours. You bought it to disappear from me. And I've spent one night learning exactly how badly I earned that. So it's your choice, and it's a real one, and I'll mean it whatever you pick. You can use it. I'll set you and the baby up somewhere so far and so safe that no one who's ever heard the name Corvi will find you, and I'll wind my own watch, and I'll let you go, and I'll count it the one good thing I ever did. She looked at the ticket for a long time, then she tore it in half, and in half again, and let the pieces fall into the blankets. I didn't run because I stopped wanting this, she said, and a tear went down through the fading bruise. I ran because I couldn't be a weakness for you. I couldn't be the thing they used to get to you. I'd rather have raised her alone in a town with one traffic light than be the crack in your armor. Her, Lazaro said softly. Cosima's breath caught. She hadn't meant to give him that. Her, she admitted. He laughed, wet and quiet and cracked wide open, and he leaned his forehead down against hers, the way he'd wanted to, for 6 years. And never once let himself. And under his hand, low against her, something moved, a small, impossible, indignant pressure, a heel or a fist, a person announcing herself. He went very still with his hand cupped over that small, insisting pressure, and something happened to Lazaro Corvi that his enemies would not have believed and his father would never have permitted. His eyes filled and spilled over, silently, and he let them, kneeling on the floor of his mother's old room, with his palm full of a daughter he had not known existed at sundown. He, who had put men in the ground without his pulse so much as changing, was undone completely by a heel the size of a thumbnail pushing back against his hand. "Hello," he said to her, very quietly. The most dangerous man in the city, reduced to a single foolish word. "Hello. I'm sorry I'm late. I'm going to be early for everything else." "You were never the crack in the armor," he said against her skin. "You were the thing the armor was for. I just didn't know what I was carrying it around to protect until I found it on a bathroom floor, and nearly lost it." He covered her hand, the watch, the pieces of the ticket, all of it, with his. No more disappearing, no more carrying the true things alone so the boss can keep his clean. "You're not the ledger anymore, Cosima. You're not the ghost at the door. You're the reason there's a door at all. And I will burn this city to the waterline before I let anyone put a hand near either of you again." She didn't answer with words. She turned her hand over under his and laced her fingers through, and let the pragmatic walls she'd built brick by careful brick over 6 years come down at last, all at once, into the warm quiet of a room where a fire ticked and a monitor sang and an old watch kept perfect, stubborn time. "Partners," she said against his shoulder, testing the word aloud, the pragmatist in her turning it over for weak points and finding none. Not the assistant. Not the ghost at the door. "Partners," he agreed. "And, when she's old enough to ask what her mother did in the war, we'll tell her the truth. That you won it with a paring knife and a spreadsheet and refused to bleed to death out of sheer spite. And that I turned up at the very end and carried the bags." A laugh broke out of her, startled and real, and the green line on the monitor jumped with it. And for once neither of them minded a spike in her pressure at all. Outside, the fog burned off the harbor. Inside, for the first time in his ordered, armored, blood-paid life, Lazaro Corvi had nothing left to arrange, and at long last, everything to keep. He cancelled it the moment he understood that the quietest person in his empire had been holding the whole thing upright from the shadows, and had nearly died in the dark rather than let him see her carry it. That's the part they never learn. The men who count money and captains and guns. The one thing worth having is the one thing none of it can buy, and it's usually standing right at the door, saying nothing, missing nothing, waiting to be seen. If the slow burn from boss and bookkeeper to an unbreakable, ruthless, devoted pair is the kind of story that hooks you, the quiet ones, who turn out to hold all the power, then hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs it tonight. And tell me in the comments, the moment he heard the heartbeat or the moment she tore the ticket in half, which one got you? I'll see you in the next one.